All right, so we're going to jump right into unraveling the mystery of who versus whom, which can be a little tricky. So I want you to follow along with your guided notes, pause the video when you need to, and go backwards and re-listen to things if I go too quickly for you. But I'm going to go through the guide notes for you to kind of give you a help on how to find the difference between who and whom correctly. So some people find like when you misuse the word whom, it's almost like nails on a chalkboard. They get really, really bothered by it. And I understand. But the point is we want to make sure we know our grammar codes. One of the reasons we took the class, we want to get better at grammar. And we don't want to guess. We don't want to rely on our spell check, on our grammar check, because I can certainly attest to the fact that like my grammar check does not actually fix all my grammar for me. And you might be able to get through life without really knowing the difference between who and whom until you get to the SAT or you get to college and you get to a professor who knows the difference and calls you out on it. And so it's a sign of intelligence to really know this. So there's this misconception that whom is very stuffy, it's very formal, it's very pretentious, which is completely false. There's nothing like phony and pretentious and overly stuffy about using the word whom. That would be like saying that using the word him or the word us or the word them is stuffy. And we use those words all the time. So the word whom is not stuffy or pretentious or uppity at all. And so it's just challenging because we just don't always know exactly how to use it. Even our English geniuses and don't always use it correctly. So, for example, our own William Shakespeare didn't always use it correctly. So in a quote from Two Gentlemen of Verona, he has this line which says, "Who wouldst thou strike?" which is completely wrong. It should be, "Whom wouldst thou strike?" And so there are lots of misconceptions on how to use it or mistakes out there. So let's see if we can kind of give everybody a little refresher course on the differences between who and whom. That might be a difference of 10 to 20 points on your SAT, and that might be just what you need to get over there with that threshold score that you're looking for. Let's see if we can get these points. Here we go. So on the front page, here's some things about the word who. Who is what we call a nominative case pronoun. So here are the other nominative case pronouns. So I, you, she, he, it, we, you, and they. Those are all nominative case pronouns. And we use the pronoun who just like we would use those pronouns. Those pronouns are used for two reasons only: for subjects and predicate nominatives. Let's just do a little review. So a subject's going to be in front of a noun, or a verb rather. There we go. So if I said, we're going to the podiatrist today, it's hard for me to say, I'm not sure why. We're going to the podiatrist today, we would use the word we, or any of those pronouns would fit there because that's a subject sitting in front of a verb. It's pretty easy. A predicate nominative, you remember, is a pattern 3 or a pattern 5, where the noun is now actually after a linking verb or after a to be verb. So I could say, it is I, not it is me, but it is I who will enlighten you about pronouns today. And so another place where we would use a nominative case pronoun. So notice that we call these nominative case. Let's see if I can get my little highlighter to show up here. My laser pointer. All right. So therefore, follows a linking verb or a to be verb, and we call them a nominative case pronoun. So predicate nominative. You have to use that word I. All right. So let's move on to who. So just like we can use them for subjects and predicate nominatives, same thing happens with the word who. If I said, Mr. Marsh, who loves grammar, sports a bow tie most school days. Well, in this case, who is actually the subject of the verb loves. Yes, outside, Mr. Marsh is the subject of the verb sports, but inside, who is the subject of the verb loves, and therefore, if it's a subject, I get to use the word who. Another one, if I said, who will the winner of the spelling bee? Who will be the winner of the spelling bee this year? I knew there was something odd there. When you're taking on questions, these interrogatives, you've got to, as we did back in Unit 3, you've got to put them back into a regular declarative order. So let's just change this into a regular statement and say, the winner of the spelling bee this year will be who. And the reason we get to use the word who is because it's following a to be verb. Here's this to be verb, and I'm coming after the to be verb, and that makes that a predicate nominative. Okay. Lastly, if I said, whoever is a friend of bacon is a friend of mine. Well, I don't need to invert this in any way. This is just a regular declarative sentence. But if I look at it in isolation, that's what we're going to focus on a little bit today, is isolating this here in purple. What I can see is this word whoever is actually the subject of the verb is, and therefore it becomes the subject. Now, it may be the subject of the sentence. This time it's the subject of this little clause, which leads into the rest of the sentence. But whoever is the subject of is. Perfect. Flip the page. Let's take a look at the word whom. Whom is what we call an objective case pronoun. So here are your other objective case pronouns: me, you, her, him, it, us, you, and them. So when we say that whom is too difficult, or whom is phony, whom is pretentious, whom is uppity, then that's like insulting these other pronouns right here, and we use these all the time. We use these for objects. That's why we call it an objective case. So whom would be used the same way. We get to use these guys, any objects, whether it's a direct object, an indirect object, or the object of a preposition. We would use these pronouns, and that's when you naturally use the word whom. Let me show you what I mean. So if I said, we wooed them with the allure of grammar, well, them is a direct object, and therefore follows the action verb, and we get to use them this time instead of the word they. Another example, if I have, she cooked him a nice scrapple and eggs breakfast. Well, the reason I get to use the word him is it's your indirect object. Remember, the indirect object we're saying is she cooked what? Breakfast. For whom? For him. And therefore, it's the indirect object. Remember, in an indirect object, the word to or for, those prepositions are assumed. They're implied. They're not really in the sentence. And then lastly, the object of a preposition follows a preposition. So if I said, I'm hiding the parsnips from her, we get to use an objective case pronoun, in this case, her, not the word she, because it's actually part of a prepositional phrase. That's all the logic. So if you think about it, then those are the same places where the word whom would be. So if I said, Mr. Marsh, whom we marvel at for his love of grammar, loves his bow ties. Well, if I think about this part here in purple, whom we marvel at, well, whom is sitting out in front of the verb marvel, but it's not the subject. What you oftentimes have to do is you have to kind of reorient the sentence. What I'm really saying is, we marvel at whom. You're like, oh, I see it now. At whom sounds like a prep phrase, and it is. It's the object of preposition, at whom, which is a object preposition, and I get to use the word whom. Another example. Whom did you get for advanced quilting next semester? And once again, it looks like it's the subject. I know it's sitting out here in the very beginning, it looks like a subject, but it's a question. So let's just simply change it around to a statement and see if it still is the subject. And when you do that, you realize it's not the subject. You is the subject. You did get whom. And therefore, it actually becomes this direct object. It says you did get direct object whom. And that's why we get to use the word whom. Last example, philanthropist. I'm so having a hard time speaking today. Philanthropist Phil may give his money to whomever he chooses. Well, once again, it looks like it's the subject of this verb chooses, but if I invert it, because I have this word he, what I'm really saying is he chooses whomever. He is the subject of the verb chooses. Whomever's on the other side, it's the direct object of chooses, and that's why I get to use the word whom, or in this case, whomever. It's the direct object of chooses. So, true, there is a question of why is this not the object of preposition to? Do you see that preposition to? And people are like, well, isn't it really the reason you're using the word whom is because it's coming off that word to? And it looks that way, but it can be very deceptive. So what we have to do is we have to take a look at it a little closer. And this is why diagramming helps us a little bit. And it took us a while to get to this point to understand why we're using the word whom for this reason. So let's see if I can kind of walk you through it. It's kind of tricky. Think about it in terms of a diagram. That word to is a preposition, and he's looking for an object. So he gives his money to Bill. Philanthropist Phil may give his money to me, put in a word there. And what's happening is this thing in purple tells us he's giving his money to, up on a tree, these three words, to whomever he chooses. When I build it up on a tree, I have to switch the order around and saying he chooses whomever. So really what's happening is in isolation, whomever is really the object, or the direct object rather, of chooses. So yes, collectively this purple thing is the object of the preposition, but in isolation, when I look at it, it's just these three words up on a tree, whomever is actually the direct object, and that's why you choose whomever. Nice thing is on the SAT, if you can guess whomever and you thought it was the object of preposition and it actually was the direct object, you'd still get it right. But it doesn't always work out that way. And our goal then, at least in leaving grammar class after 90 days, is you may not necessarily be a grammar god or goddess, but our goal is for you to walk out stronger than what you came in with, that you feel a little bit stronger in your grammar and say, you know what, I'm not guessing as much as I used to. I feel a bit more confident. Some of you will feel really confident. So I'm going to try to show you a little trick on who versus whom. So let's go to that third and final page, this little trick that we have with who or whom. So because who is nominative and so is the word he, anytime you can put the word he in place of the word who and it makes sense, then you got the who. And then because him and whom are both objective case, if you ever come across the word whom, put in the word him and it should still make sense. So let me show you an example. It says, who is planning on trying Granny's famous coot cobbler at the church picnic? Well, if I could put in the word he and it still makes sense, yeah, he is planning on trying Granny's famous coot cobbler at the church picnic. And therefore, that's why who actually fits there. And if I said, whom did you sell your magic beans to? Well, once again, it's a question. So invert the order and say, you did sell your magic beans to whom? And if you're following along with your notes, you can kind of rewrite that one. You did sell your magic beans to whom? And then put in the word him. And it makes sense. So that's a nice little trick. Think of just getting rid of this W and thinking that we have this who and he kind of match up. And then if you get rid of this W, you can kind of see whom and him matching up a little bit. So maybe that might help you as well. But ultimately, there's a nice little system that I have, like sort of a 4-step plan to kind of help you understand this. Because the thing is, it's a great trick, but it only works if you're actually able to maneuver the sentence correctly. If you can't maneuver the sentence correctly, sometimes you think it sounds right in your head, but it's not really right. And that's the problem with the word whom, is we just don't speak it correctly. Okay, so lastly, let's take a look at this little 4-step plan that we have on how to figure out whether it's a who or whom. So the first thing is we have to isolate. It's the most important step, is you have to isolate the part that has the who or the whom. So when you read the sentence, figure out where the who or the whom is, start there, and figure out where that little section ends and get rid of everything else. So if I said Rabbi Steve made a ketchup-filled piñata for the party and gave whoever or whomever wanted whoever wanted to try, a chance to break it open. So I can see that it starts off with whoever, whomever, I'm not sure which one it is, and then it's whoever, whomever wanted to try. If you think about it logically, what's happening is Rabbi Steve is giving a chance, direct object, to whom? To whoever or whomever wanted to try. And you're like, well, it's an indirect object. It has to be the word whom. And I'm like, well, slow down. Look at it just in isolation. Look at this thing we have in purple and say, okay, let's just only focus on that. It's almost like being a surgeon. I want to just simply focus on this small area and sort of put a sheet over everything else. So step 2 is take what you have and see if you have to reorient it. Sometimes things aren't in the right order. That happens sometimes. So I want to find the verb, which is wanted, and I want to make sure that the subject's in front of it. Well, the only choice I have is whoever or whomever. So that must be in the right place. There's no way of reordering these words. So I'm going to leave them exactly how they are. And that happens oftentimes with whos. Oftentimes when you come across the who, you don't need to move it. Step 3, identify what you're missing. Well, I see that this word whoever or whomever, whatever one I'm going to choose, is actually in front of the verb. This verb's looking for a subject. Where are you, subject? It's right here. And so if I'm looking for a subject, I'm like, okay, I'm looking for a subject. I identified that I'm looking for a subject. And if I go back to my notes, I know that subjects are nominative case and who is nominative case. So I get to use the word whoever. So that's why we have to slow down sometimes, because it might look like it's an indirect object, but in its isolation, it's actually the subject of wanted. Let's do another example. All right. Thank you, Rabbi Steve. Let's take on the creepy old dude down the street, who or whom the neighborhood kids fear, gives out nickels and religious tracts at Halloween. Tracts are like those little tiny little papers that religious people hand out to let you know about things. Anyway, so in this case, I'm going to isolate where it starts off with the who, whom, and just simply focus on that. So put a sheet over everything else and just focus on the part that you're going to dissect as a surgeon. I really like that metaphor I'm using right now. All right, so here it is. Who or whom the neighborhood kids fear. Second step, reorient it if it needs to be kind of reoriented. Well, think about it. Who, whom the neighborhood kids fear. Fear is a verb. And if I treated who or whom as the subject, I wouldn't know what to do with the word kids. Because I'm not saying who or whom fear kids. What I'm really saying is the neighborhood kids fear who or whom. So I have to move this guy. Because think about it, who or whom is really referring to the old dude. So I'm really saying is the neighborhood kids fear the old dude. So it's actually sitting on this side, on the other side of the verb. Step 3, figure out then what position is this sitting in? What noun position is it sitting in? Well, I already have the verb fear. I already have a subject for that verb. So on the other side, it looks like I'm looking for some kind of direct object. All right, so I'm looking for a direct object here. Sorry about that, my slides were slightly off. So I'm looking for my direct object because I already have a verb and a subject. So this guy's naturally answering like kids fear whom. It's one of the reasons why direct object answers the question of whom. And so it follows that action verb. It's kind of looking for a direct object. And for that reason, if I choose, I'm going to choose whom. All right. So when I put the sentence back in regular order, I would say the creepy old dude down the street, whom the neighborhood kids fear. gives out nickels and really just tracks at Halloween. Last example. The principal will give a gift basket of Richard Simmons fitness DVDs to whomever wins the dance contest at the daddy-daughter dance. All right, so resist this temptation to use this word to. Only isolate starting with the word who or whom and go forward from there. So I'm going to put a sheet over this other part. I'm not going to worry about that word to. I'm just going to focus on this part. It's in purple. All right, so here it is, part of this clause. So now that I've isolated it, figure out if you have to reorient it. And the way I have to figure out if I have to reorient something is I find the verb wins and figure out, is it in the right order? Is the subject in front of it? Well, yeah, whomever is sitting in front of it is the subject. I'm not moving dance contest. It's not the dance contest wins, but it's whomever wins the dance contest. So it's already in the right order. That's great. Third step, identify what you're looking for. Well, I have a verb, and I always simply say, look, the first thing I look for is if I have a verb, what's your subject? And if you don't have a subject, then it's easy. It's going to be who. But if you already have a subject, it's probably going to be a whom. It's kind of an easy trick. So the verb wins is looking for a subject. It's subjects here. And so one of those two get to be the subject. So really what's happening is it's sort of working collectively as the object of this preposition to. But if I isolate it, I realize that the word wins is looking for a subject. And for that reason, I get to use the word whoever. Whoever's a perfect subject. And so therefore, it's whoever wins. Remember, I can use the word he in there and say he wins the dance contest. So back to my sentence, it's the principal will give a gift basket of Richard Simmons fitness DVDs to whoever wins the dance contest. And that's the trick I'm saying is, even though that comes off that word to, don't think of it as a prep phrase. Think of that whole thing at the end as the object prep phrase. But collectively, it works as an object prepositional phrase. But individually, the word whoever is the subject of wins. That's a lot to take in. I understand. So what I'd like for you to do to get out of this mess is I'd like for you to take on the first worksheet. I know there's two of them. They look exactly the same. There's one that starts off, the very first sentence about a withered pickle. And so I'd like for you to take that worksheet on, figure out which of the two choices you want, the who or the whom, and can you go the next step of figuring out why? And so we're no longer guessing to say, hey, I'm choosing the word who because it's a subject, or I'm choosing the word whom because it's a direct object. Those typically are the two answers that you're looking for. But can you do the worksheet as well as figuring out not just simply the right answer, but why you're choosing the right answer? I want us to go beyond simply guessing. Okay. Thanks for listening.